Good afternoon. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Councilmember Cam Gordon, the chair, and I'm joined today by Andrew Johnson, Elizabeth Glidden, and Lisa Bender. We're a quorum of the committee. We can conduct the committee's business. We have four consent items and one discussion item on the agenda. I'll go through the consent items first, and any committee member wants to pull something off for discussion, you can. The first item is approving appointments to the Community Environmental Advisory Commission. The second is approving our appointments and the mayoral appointments to the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council. Third item is authorizing acceptance of a grant from the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, Office of Justice Programs of $90,000 for 2 years to support our early intervention program for youth at risk of involvement with violence. And our fourth item is authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the Minnesota Department of Human Services for an amount not to exceed $1.35 million over 3 years to expand mental health and support services to high school students receiving services through our school-based clinic program. Would anyone like to pull any of those items off for discussion or questions? Seeing none, then I'll move all of those forward for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say nay. Those motions carry then. Now we'll move on to our discussion item, and this has to do with our the franchise fee discussion. And Luke is here to talk to us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Gordon, council members. Today, I'm joined with a few others to discuss some of the potential energy and climate programming that could be done with any potential utility franchise fee increase and any revenue that would come from that. My name is Luke Hollenkamp. I'm in the City Coordinator's Office of Sustainability. I'm also joined by Patrick Hanlon, Director of Environmental Programs in the Health Department, and Matt Kazinka, who's the co-chair of the Clean Energy Partnership's Energy Vision Advisory Committee, and also with the Lake Street Council. Today we'll discuss some of the progress that we've made as a city to date on our energy and climate goals, and then talk about how the Clean Energy Partnership has created a process to determine the additional resources and programs needed to meet those goals and to accelerate our process towards them. And then finally, we'll close out with examples of possible city and partnership programs that could be created or expanded if any additional resources were allocated. To first get an idea of where we are as a city on our greenhouse gas emissions, what you see here is a bar chart, which shows our emissions going back through 2006. And what you'll notice is in 2015, we did hit our greenhouse gas reduction goal of a 15% reduction. We actually had a 17.8% reduction. So we hit our first goal in 2015. We're now looking towards our 2030 goal, where we aim to make a 30% reduction. And ultimately, looking forward to 2050, we aim to make an 80% reduction. A few things I'd like to point out here is, although we are making progress towards our goals, we are currently not on track to meet our 2050 goals. Most of the progress we have made to date, in fact, 81% of our total progress to date, has been because the carbon intensity of the electricity we receive from Xcel Energy has decreased over time. So mostly our progress has been due to a cleaner, greener electricity source. I also want to point out that you'll see here two of the bottom colors, a blue color and a gray color. That's electricity and natural gas. And those actually indicate most of the energy that's going towards our buildings in our community. And here's another look at that in the pie chart. In fact, 71% of the emissions for us as a whole, as a community, come from the building energy sector. This really brings home to us the point that we need to target the energy use from buildings, residential, commercial, industrial buildings, to meet our goals and hopefully to exceed our goals in the future. Some of the ways that we tackle the energy use of buildings is by looking at programs that could increase, for instance, energy retrofits for existing buildings. We also have an energy goal specifically for energy retrofits in our climate action plan. And that goal says that 75% of households, both owner-occupied and rental households, would receive energy retrofits by 2025. This bar graph shows that in 2006, we only reached 837 households through the Home Energy Squad program, which is a joint offering by CenterPoint Energy and Excel Energy. To achieve 75% energy retrofits of households in Minneapolis by 2025, we would have to greatly increase that number of annual retrofits. It really requires an order of magnitude larger. So we are making progress, but much more progress is needed, especially to hit that 80% reduction goal, and also then to meet the 75% energy retrofit goal for households. To help meet this goal, and also to meet our energy goals and increase energy efficiency and renewable energy, the city formed with Excel Energy and CenterPoint Energy back in 2015, the Clean Energy Partnership. The tools that we utilize as Clean Energy Partnership is using community and stakeholder engagement, looking at data, gathering information on that, and assessing where some possibilities lie in that data, and then also examining policy levers that the city may have and ways that we can work with Excel Energy and CenterPoint Energy to examine some of those policy levers. So we've been engaged in the Clean Energy Partnership now for a few years. I think we've made good progress. And again, a lot of our progress that we have made is working on building energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. But again, there's been this realization, though, that much more work still is needed to meet our climate energy goals as a city. When the Clean Energy Partnership looks at ways we can meet our climate and energy goals, we convene around the partnership board. Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Glidden, you both are members of that partnership board, as well as Mayor Hodges, currently Councilmember Reich, and City Coordinator Spencer Cron. In addition to the city leadership, we also have utility leadership. A number of vice presidents from both utilities are members of that board. And that board also interacts with the planning team. That is the staff members of each of the three partners. And there's a number of planning team members here in the audience today, too, who have spent much time talking about climate energy issues, as well as specifically looking at additional programming that can be done in the future. But a really valuable resource we have as Clean Energy Partnership is the Energy Vision Advisory Committee. This is our expert citizen engagement committee. It's made up of 15 members. They really are invaluable in terms of developing policy, developing goals, examining progress that's been made, as well as then getting their feedback on proposals that cities or utilities may have. We see them as an integral partner to the work we do. And as an integral partner, they actually convened a study led by their own members, examining the resources and programming that the city and the partnership as a whole would need to meet these very aggressive but attainable energy and climate goals. And I'm joined here today by Matt Kazinka, as I mentioned before, who's an Evac co-chair, also of the Lake Street Council. Matt is a co-chair as well with Abby Finnis, who's from the Great Plains Institute. And I invite Matt now up to give a presentation on the study that Evac performed.
Chair Gordon, council members,
Welcome.
Thank you, Luke. As Luke mentioned, my name is Matt Kazinka. I work at the Lake Street Council, and I work primarily with small businesses on energy and other sustainability issues. I'm also co-chair of Evac with my co-chair Abby Finnis. In case you are unfamiliar with Evac, as Luke mentioned, we have a 15-member committee that represents almost entirely residents of Minneapolis from several different wards. We have folks from educational institutions, environmental organizations, business-serving organizations, residential and community-focused organizations, and small businesses. We have been working as part of the Clean Energy Partnership to identify how we can move the work of the partnership forward. Luke laid out the case very well for why we need to accelerate our goals, and that's something that, as Evac members, we've taken as a serious task for ourselves. That we know that, especially to meet goals like that 75% retrofit goal by 2025 is incredibly ambitious and also incredibly important, not only for our climate goals, but also to make our housing more affordable and comfortable for our residents, and as well as making commercial space more affordable and comfortable and usable for businesses. We have been, from the start, trying to think about how do we leverage that expertise that we have to guide the partnership towards addressing, clear, concrete sort of issues. And as we've thought about these goals around accelerating energy efficiency implementation across the city, we've noted some very clear barriers. So one is that most residents and businesses are not aware of the resources that exist at the utility level to help them implement energy efficiency in their homes and businesses. And even if they are aware, there's lots of barriers that may keep them from participating in them, either being confused about which program they should participate in, or not having the financial ability to participate in those, either to pay the cost of an upfront retrofit or an upfront assessment, or to even to access financing for making improvements in their homes and businesses, of course. Another key issue that people struggle with in working on climate and energy across the country is the split incentive problem between tenants and landlords, property owners, that often there is, tenants may want to have improvements made, but they don't want to make the investment in a long-term improvement if they don't have any long-term certainty in that building, and property owners may not want to make an investment if they're not the ones that will reap the benefits of lower energy bills. So that's a key issue that we really want to work on. And finally, as we think about expanding the capacity and work of the city, that we know that there's limited ability we have right now to even just meet some of the goals we have in our current Clean Energy Partnership work plan, that staffing, as well as our ability to partner with outside organizations and expertise, is holding us back from being able to make the kind of broad improvements that we know we need to make. And at the core of all of this, I believe, is funding. You know that for us to have the staff capacity at these institutions, as well as the ability to partner with other organizations to offer additional incentives to residents and businesses to make improvement and to make energy efficiency truly accessible to everyone, no matter their income, their first language spoken, or their ownership status of property, that additional funding is like a key and necessary piece. So we launched a funding work group at the beginning of the year. It's 6 of us, all Minneapolis residents, that represented a variety of different groups and interests. We were supported by staff from the city, from Excel, and from CenterPoint to help us figure out a plan. And we did a study of what could potentially work as a funding mechanism to fund this work long-term and in a sustainable way. We knew not only that we need funding that is reliable, that we know will be there year to year and that we can build on to develop programs that work and improve those programs as we go, but also funding that is at the right scale, that isn't just a little bit here and a little bit there, but something that will allow us to truly make a dent and actually accelerate our progress. And from looking at the various options we have, we wanted to move away from the model of relying on grants here and there, especially with uncertainty at the state and federal level about what sort of grants may be available, and instead move to one of the mechanisms we have at the city, which is the franchise fee, which is the fee rate that is set by the city with the utilities, and is something that the city has authority to adjust as needed. We think that this is the most sustainable and scalable option for this work. Just to have a couple slides on what the impacts of this would be and what it would look like. So residents and businesses each have different fee rates that they are at currently, 4.5%, 5%, and 3% for respectively residential, commercial, and industrial customers. We are Evac in our study, we proposed that the city consider increasing the fee rates by 0.5% in each of those customer classes. So taking up to 5, 5.5, and 3.5. What that means, what that looks like for an average business and an average resident. For a resident, you'd be looking at, based on the past 4 years, kind of the average of bills, you'd be looking at about a 57 cent increase on the average monthly bill of a resident in Minneapolis. For businesses, for most businesses, the average increase would be about a $7.16 increase on their monthly bills. But I will say that there is a lot of variation. It depends a lot on how much, in what way they use energy. So for businesses that just use it to heat and cool and turn on the lights, you know, that they have a much lower impact, of course, much more similar to a residence. But for businesses that use energy for some form of production, whether that's food manufacturing or refrigeration or any sort of industrial manufacturing function, you know, that is a different type of impact, higher. The industrial category, as you can see, the increase is much higher. That is because the industrial category of the industrial rate class for Excel and for Centerpoint doesn't actually mean manufacturing businesses. It is the highest users of energy in the city. So this could be educational institutions, colleges, large businesses and properties, as well as industrial and manufacturing buildings. So while the increase is certainly higher for industrial customers, that is because it is in proportion to their normal energy bills, which are in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars each month. One thing I will note is that, I work with small businesses in my work with Lake Street Council, and we're quite aware that businesses are concerned about costs, that additional cost is a challenge to businesses. What I have heard from both talking to our businesses and talking to other business partners and chambers is that, while they have concerns about additional costs, they also see the value of the investment that this could make in making energy efficiency and lower energy bills achievable for businesses. Their concern when I have talked to them about this proposal is that if we were to raise the franchise fees, they would really want that money to go towards funding energy efficiency and funding tools that will make efficiency more accessible to businesses. They want to make sure that the money that they're putting into this would go to the purpose that it is allocated for. So I want to run through just a high level of some of the recommendations that Evac had for how to use this funding on the residential and commercial side. And then I'll hand it back to talk more about some of the specifics. So on the residential side, we see a few key things we'd like to have funded. One is to expand outreach to single-family and multifamily buildings, both the tenants and the property owners of those buildings, to implement the lessons learned from a community engagement pilot that the Clean Energy Partnership funded this last year, which reached renters in all types of buildings and gave us a very good idea of what are some of the barriers that renters face, what some of the things that keep landlords from making investments in their buildings. We want to take those lessons and actually start to implement them, not in just a few key neighborhoods, but in the green zones of the city and in all neighborhoods of the city. Two, we think there could be a key kind of target we may want to have for subsidizing utility program visits, especially for tenants and building owners that may not participate in those programs otherwise, especially for low-income renters as well. We also would like to see the large building benchmarking program that the city has expand to multifamily buildings, because we see a lot of the opportunities that exist are in multifamily buildings, and we want to see the resources that the city is putting into large buildings extend to those multifamily building operators, and to get a better sense of where the opportunities are and help us make those investments. And finally, we know that financing is a barrier for some. We would like to have the city look into ways to reduce those financing barriers, either by offering new financing programs or helping connect people to the financing programs that exist, making them more accessible. On the commercial side, we would like to see the Green Business Cost Share Program, which Patrick will talk about in a moment, be funded at the level that will meet demand, because it is a program that has been successful and we want to see it expanded. We also want to have mechanisms in place to make sure that all small businesses in the city learn about and can access and use utility programs. So a small business engagement program that meets businesses where they're at, uses trusted messengers, and is effective in bringing small businesses into this era of energy efficiency. Again, there may be opportunities to target subsidies for building efficiency studies, especially in small industrial buildings or other buildings where there's a lot of process efficiency that could be gained. We'd like to see increased technical assistance for our large building operators. Those that are participating in the benchmarking program now have a lot of data on where their opportunities might be. We'd like to see the city be able to help support them in actually making and implementing changes. And finally, we'd like to, as for businesses, as we want to see for residents, to create tools that reduce financing barriers, whether that is increasing the usage of the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, PACE program, or creating new, more inclusive financing models or 0% interest loans. We want to look into that and see what is the best tool that can make efficiency investments more accessible for businesses. One final thing I'd like to point out is that We did write a pretty lengthy report about our recommendations and how the data we worked through to come to our conclusions and make our recommendations. The link is available on the slides, and I believe they'll be uploaded to the city website. So with that, I'd like to invite Luke back up. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And due to really some of the great work that Energy Vision Advisory Committee did during their analysis of some of the needs to meet our energy goals and our climate goals, the Clean Energy Partnership Boards saw fit to adopt a joint resolution. So this is a resolution that was adopted by all members of the Partnership Board, city members, as well as the members of Excel Energy and Centerpoint Energy. And I'll just draw your attention to the end of the resolution, which says, the Clean Energy Partnership Board supports additional dedicated city funding for new and existing programs to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy investments with a specific focus on equity and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And again, this exact language was adopted at our Q3 Clean Energy Partnership Board meeting in July. Building off of the great recommendations that Evac made and Matt just presented, we see that implementing those recommendations really falls into 4 categories. There are policy levers that can be examined and implemented, engagement strategies that can help make existing and new programs as beneficial to the community as possible. There are incentives that can help move both building owners, residential customers to take on energy efficiency and renewable energy work. And there's also financing options to reduce those barriers to acquiring capital for these projects. We're going to examine some policy options, some programs that meet these 4 criteria here in the next few minutes. But I will mention, though, that the list we're talking about today isn't necessarily exhaustive of all the possible programs that we could use. I recommend reading Evac's report, which mentions a lot of those programs. We're going to provide an illustration today of some of the high impact programs that we think could have the potential for being scaled up, and many other programs have many similarities to these programs. As Matt mentioned, financing and buy down options, specifically for programming, could be very important to increasing energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. One potential is a 0% interest energy efficiency loan program. This would be a program where the city could help buy down the interest rate for residential customers to increase home insulation and air sealing in their houses. Center for Energy and the Environment, who is the provider of the Home Energy Squad visits, estimates that probably about 25% of single-family houses in Minneapolis have no wall insulation at all. By helping those homeowners put in wall insulation or attic insulation or air sealing, we can significantly reduce their energy burden, especially during the winter months when energy can be very unaffordable for many residents. And this program would also build on a successful pilot that we undertook with Center for Energy and the Environment 2016, where we did provide 32 loans. And we can also provide income qualification standards to those to make sure we're also hitting the households that are most in need. On both the business side and the residential side, we can also buy down energy assessment visits. So for that's Home Energy Squad visits for residential customers, and that can be turnkey assessments, the turnkey program for commercial customers, specifically small businesses. We can provide incentives that would reduce the financial barriers to actually undertaking these assessments, as well as then we can provide, as Patrick will mention, some actual incentive offers to pair with financing to, again, reduce those barriers. And again, this builds on a pilot that we had in 2016, where we did provide 220 low-income or 220 visits to the Home Energy Squad, many of those being low-income visits as well. We'll now talk a little bit more about the benchmarking program, and Patrick Hanlon will discuss that.
Chair Gordon, council members, my name is Patrick Hanlon. I'm the Director of Environmental Programs for the Health Department. In looking at recommendations from Evac that we could help to implement on the operations side, we looked at the Building Energy Benchmarking Program. We've been running the Commercial Energy Benchmarking Program for about 5 years, and we've got some great data. That's a program run by Nadia Khan in the Health Department, along with other city staff. And looking at ways how we could go from getting compliance with that ordinance to really driving change in that sector. You look at 15% of citywide greenhouse gas emissions from a relatively small number of properties, which is 70% of the commercial square footage. So if we can get some changes, if we can drive changes in that sector, we can make some pretty significant greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so the strategy there would be to build upon collaborative success with the utilities in conducting workshops and doing technical assistance in that area. And then on a policy level, as also was mentioned, that Matt mentioned, was looking at multifamily residential and opening up residential energy benchmarking as a policy and implementing that program in the same way that we did the commercial program through doing technical assistance and bringing together incentives and bringing together programs that really help those areas or help that sector to drive towards energy reduction. And again, that's an area that would make has a huge footprint or impact, looking at between 45% and 65% of the residential building, or the rental building area with that program. And so that program would qualify them for additional incentives through the city programs. And then also mentioned is the Green Business Cost Share Program, is looking at a program that we could hit the ground running with these fees and with the recommendations from Evac. We've had demonstrated success working with 76 businesses on air quality, energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. It would be focused on small businesses and large businesses, combining engagement, like as Matt was talking about, with groups like Lake Street Council, with the Chamber of Commerce Energy Smart program, using the incentives of the Green Business Cost Share Program, and then looking at financing partners as well that specialize in that area. The Green Business Cost Share Program, we leverage investments at around 10 to 1. So we have invested $434,722.70 to make sure that we're keeping track of all of our numbers. And we've leveraged over $4.5 million in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects with that program in the first couple of years of focusing in the energy area. Businesses are saving over $650,000 in energy savings. So it's a unique area where you can invest fees and eventually save businesses more money than they're being charged in those fees. We've reduced over 15 million pounds of CO2. That's equivalent to about 1,500 cars off the road annually. And again, that's just within the first couple of years of the program, and we see a lot of opportunity to be able to scale that approach up. We were oversubscribed for funding in May of this year. And again, I just laid out a graph here with how we can leverage money. This is since the program started, so this also includes air quality. But I also like to look at this graph not only as the financials of the money that was leveraged, but also the impact that can be made. So if we're focusing our money on city-only projects, that graph on the left is the impact that can be made if we're utilizing these fees and leveraging projects that happen out in the world where the other 97% of greenhouse gas emissions are taking place. We can really have some huge impacts when we leverage investments from nonprofits, from government partners, from utility funding. And it should be noted that there's a lot of unused capacity with utility incentives that are out there that could be leveraged into Minneapolis for it to be fully used and fully utilized. With the commercial program opportunities, there is a lifetime of work that could be done. We're looking at focusing our engagement, these incentive programs and financing tools in green zones first. Those are the areas that are highlighted in green, and those are areas that have been historically underinvested in and historically intentionally underinvested in. And so starting in those areas first, where we're providing additional incentives to drive down energy costs for small businesses in those areas, and then working our way out to other opportunities across the city. Another approach that was recommended by Evac was a green housing cost share program. So taking that same successful approach that we have with the Green Business Cost Share Program and move it into the housing sector. Matt mentioned there's a split incentive between tenants and owners. Owners usually pass the costs on to tenants, and tenants a lot of times don't have the resources or the capacity to make improvements in their building, so they're stuck bearing the burden of those costs. There's a tremendous opportunity to address affordability. A lot of times we talk about affordability in housing as supply and demand of housing, but there's tremendous opportunity in energy efficiency and being able to create affordability within the city in addressing energy efficiency. So as we look at rolling out this program, we're looking at a way that we can start small and scale up, and we looked at the city's Lead and Healthy Homes program as a way when city staff are going into these houses and they're working on changing out windows that have lead, they're doing other renovation projects in the house to address healthy housing conditions. They can also be looking at weatherization and energy efficiency. Most of the homes that program works with are low-income housing, and so it's a way to address affordability in those houses at the same time when the staff is there and when contractors are in the units. We look at this program could probably project, we project that we could leverage resources at 5 to 1 with this program. So a $200,000 investment would leverage around $1 million in private investment and utility investment. It should also be noted that when we go into these homes, there's federal dollars, there's HUD dollars that are on the table that are not being utilized. So there's $1,500 for weatherization that usually isn't used because it's not high enough of an incentive to get owners to conduct weatherization projects or energy efficiency projects in the house. So like I said, we would start small. This is similar to the commercial program, start small in green zones, look at high priority areas. These are cases of lead and healthy homes cases, lead poisoning cases. And so starting in those green zone areas and then working our way out. And the opportunity, again, is a lifetime of work in looking at the residential opportunities that are out there and scaling up our engagement, our incentives, and our financing programs to target rental and owner-occupied housing. And one piece that can't be stressed enough is the community engagement piece, implementing the recommendations of the Clean Energy Partnership in pilot projects that were recommended. And this is working with community-based organizations to assist homeowners, renters, landlords, and small businesses. We've seen a lot of success on both residential and commercial when we have community partners that are out there that are bringing all the pieces of the puzzle together. So they're bringing together utility incentives, they're bringing together other incentive programs that are out there, and bringing all those resources together to make projects happen and to implement energy efficiency projects across the city. And so this is the last slide. We've talked a lot today about accelerating. We need to bend the curve using policy, engagement, incentives, and financing to hit our goals. And it kind of gets lost when you look at it in terms of charts and hitting 80% of climate action goals. And the other day this is the season of departments asking for resources to meet their needs to get their base work done. And I was in a room with Gretchen Musicant, and someone had asked, well, why are we looking at doing all these things, these special things that go above and beyond when, some of our base needs, we have departments saying we can't get some of our base needs done. And I was really liked her response was she said, well, according to the world's scientists, this is our most pressing need. And that gets lost in a lot of these graphs and a lot of the information that we bring forward. And I felt very fortunate to work for a department that thinks that way. And I feel very fortunate standing up here and knowing that we live in a city that our council and the people in the city know that that's a reality. And then I also feel very fortunate to be standing up here representing Evac and them coming forward with this whole concept, this whole franchise fee concept that they've worked a long time on. It's taken them a lot of time to bring this all together, a lot of conversations and a lot of work to get that all done. So thank you very much, and we'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. I don't see any questions right away. Councilmember Glidden, I think has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I I know you have a resolution, and are you going to move that for today? Or is that like for,
No, I'm going to move that today. I can move it first, but we have questions too.
okay, which is more, I think, about kind of the general support for the need for increased revenue. And I do want to say I really appreciate that Evac dug into this topic, worked with folks from the city, from Centerpoint, from Excel, on really bringing together a lot of information. There's a lot in your report. And I appreciate that you kind of gave us some good food for thought on some of your recommendations. I'm trying to make sure I understand how this now becomes, what does the city staff do to kind of take those recommendations? And I see, Mr. Hanlon, you've kind of given us sort of the some specifics on some of those recommendations, but I'm just trying to understand, like, kind of what are our next steps? Maybe this is more for Luke, I'm not sure, just to make sure we're understanding kind of how would we really, if this franchise fee is approved, take the steps to build out, I think, what I would envision as a more comprehensive plan that is not an Evac plan. I feel Evac gives us that advice, but is sort of the city enterprise plan, and in conjunction with Centerpoint and Excel, how do we kind of raise it to that level and kind of figure out kind of what are we going to do to continue? Because some of these things are programs that are recommended that we have some history with, that we know how to track. Some of these things are new proposals. Anyway, there's sort of a mixture here, so that we kind of then take what is a plan and how do we build in the metrics and the kind of constant evaluation to look at that. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is, because we have so much going on right now around housing, and just, how are others, and maybe there's a big city staff team working on this, but just, we have a lot of folks within the enterprise who bring expertise. And so how do we fold in those other folks and just know that there's sort of a set kind of group that gives their input or whatever. And I just bring out the housing piece because so much in here has been about housing, and there is a very robust discussion around all sorts of policy and funding items that are more about the affordability end of housing. This is how do you, more about the safe and healthy homes, and some, and also about affordability too. So anyway, I just want to kind of put that out there because I'm curious kind of at what point do we get a recommendation on kind of how we take it to the next level with how to take this information. And we're kind of in the midst of getting the resident input through the community meeting process, and then we'll kind of have the ordinances themselves to be considered, and, but then that sort of sets off a whole bunch of other stuff.
Chair Gordon, Councilmember Glenn. I think you're absolutely right to be thinking about the next step. Obviously, right now there's kind of the revenue side that's been going forward with policymakers, and we've started talking as staff with Evac and some of the policymakers, as well as how do you start determining that expenditure side. I'd say that I think after any potential actions taken on the ordinance and a budget is adopted in the coming weeks, I believe, that I think then there's a defined, perhaps you would call it a bucket of money to be spent on these programs. And obviously there's many different programs that could be funded. And what I see is going into early next year, we'll be bringing in new Clean Energy Partnership board members, and obviously some of their aides and staff as well. And I see one of the first tasks next year would be to be looking at that expenditure side, using the Clean Energy Partnership and Evac as a sounding board for staff to talk about programs, recommendations, also obviously talking with the utilities. They have a lot of expertise as well on many of these programs. So bringing in our new Clean Energy Partnership board members and their aides and talking as a group about some of the staff recommendations for programs, what can be scaled up quickly, I think is something to be considered, as well as what maybe takes a longer term investment So I think there will be a balance there as well. And then I think there's a balance we discussed on energy efficiency and renewable energy. And I think there's also a balance to be discussed. And in fact, Evac will be having their quarterly meeting on Thursday. And one of the questions we've posed to Evac is, what is a balance in terms of, let's say, policy versus financial incentives directly out the door? For instance, policy development oftentimes takes people, engagement, staff, and then obviously promoting action in the community requires financial incentives. So if there is a pot of money, what's that balance between, people capacity, policy capacity, and money out the door? And a lot of our organizations that represent Evac are also nonprofit entities, and I think that they often struggle with this with this question of finding that balance. So we're looking forward to this Thursday hearing more thoughts from them on what that right balance might be, and then reporting that information back to the partnership board, and then early next year incorporating the partnership board into these decisions, ultimately to be taken up, I believe, by city council.
So I'll just comment on that a little bit because I think the process is going to be really important, but I also think there's still questions out there right now about how much money will this potentially bring in. What are there existing things in the budget that might already be tied to this? And my theory was we approved the budget and we approved the ordinances to raise the franchise fee. But hopefully in that process, maybe we can come up with a clearer staff direction on then what is actually going to get funded. So maybe that is something we could do this year at least, is tee it up, maybe something similar to what was outlined here, is that there'll be a process that we're going to have to pursue to narrow it down. What I wasn't comfortable with was just letting it pass as a rate increase without some kind of action that the council would take. So that's why there's a resolution before you today, which is very general, maybe as general as the Clean Energy Partnerships action, just to support this concept. But I think it's really important that we do tie this to clean energy efforts, and that's what we say we're doing throughout the process, and that seemed to be the role this committee could play. And so that's why I thought, well, let's have it come here, let's talk about some of the details, and then let's take some action that at least expressly says that, and we'll refer that off to Ways and Means, because it's my understanding that in the ordinance themselves, that won't talk about where the money goes. They're just, the ordinances that get amended will just talk about raising the franchise fee a certain percentage. So that's why there's this resolution in front of you, and maybe I can read it, or at least there's copies available over there too. I'll read the resolves clause at least, which is really the crux of it. But this would establish a framework for clean energy funding for Minneapolis, and it would be resolved that the city of Minneapolis commits to using the increased revenue generated by raising the energy utility franchise fees by 0.5% to fund energy efficiency and renewable energy programs, policies, and interventions that will serve all energy ratepayers in Minneapolis, including homeowners, renters, and rental property owners, and commercial and industrial businesses of all sizes. Maybe I'll just speak to that a little bit. I think one of the reasons why this is acceptable to people is because they see this rate increase tied to energy and clean energy and potentially energy savings and efficiencies. I think one of the things we've also heard is that the different classes of ratepayers, if you will, are concerned that it might not benefit them. So this at least calls us out that we're going to look for programs that will support residential as well as industrial and commercial. I think this will give us a little bit of a framework, at least, as we move into the budget discussions and talk about it. Are there questions on this or comments or anything? Well, then I'm Councilmember Clayton.
Thank you. I guess my question just is, have you talked about this with finance staff, and kind of how would this then be incorporated? And I wonder if we should forward this to Ways and Means kind of as a necessary step, because it is a direction about funding resources.
Its assumption was, and I think maybe I said that would be referred to Ways and Means, certainly would be. And mostly this was vetted with sustainability staff in the coordinator's office. I don't know if it actually got Finance looked at it as well. I'm seeing head nods. So at least the awareness, you don't have any comments you want to make or, okay. But because it's going to Ways and Means, it can certainly be vetted more fully there. I'd also like to see us, see if we, as a group, come up with some kind of staff direction for the future, but I wasn't prepared to do that today either.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just say kind of my questions weren't because I was thinking we should have had a staff direction today. And I kind of feel like there may be something that's more about kind of what's the process once we see if an ordinance is, or two ordinances are approved, kind of what would be those next steps to make sure that is clear, and we kind of figure out how that loops into deliverables and things like that. So just for you to kind of hear that a little bit more directly from me, I just wanted to kind of put some of those things on the table, because I think we have some good grounding of what would happen, but now we kind of need to put this into what's the framework for a multiple year kind of initiative and reporting back and kind of the things that the public expects and that the policymakers would want to see too, which is goal setting and transparency and all that kind of stuff.
I agree, and I think one of the only reasons why this has significant support is because people do see this as being tied to the Clean Energy Partnership and the Climate Action Plan and working on those goals. And I think if we end up just raising the franchise fee and it goes into the general fund and we forget to follow through and we don't have any accountability or transparency or any good process, and we can't point to things and say this did actually save energy or promote clean energy, we're going to have disappointed policymakers and disappointed public, and we've got to make sure that we don't do that. And I think the process, we really have to nail down a good process, maybe annually, or what's going to be the process for determining how we use these resources and report back to the council. So we'll keep working on that, even though this little framework doesn't have that explicitly put in there. But if we're willing to and ready to vote on the motion, then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the resolution before you, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. I guess I'll move to receive and file the report as well. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. And any opposed? That motion carries, and I don't see any other business before us, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.